When I was 9 years old, I learned that monsters don't always live under the bed. Sometimes they live in your own house, wearing the face of someone you're supposed to call dad. For years, I watched my mother shrink not in size, but in spirit every day. Her voice grew quieter, her eyes dimmer, her smiles rarer. And I was just a kid, too small to stop it, too scared to even speak. Until one night, I realized something. If I didn't do something soon, the darkness in our home would swallow both of us whole. It didn't happen all at once. I started with a plan, a simple one. A secondhand tablet, a password-protected folder, and a determination far bigger than my age. I recorded what others didn't see. I kept proof of what everyone pretended wasn't happening. I didn't know if it would work, but I knew I couldn't just wait for someone else to save us. That choice changed everything. It led to a trial, a conviction, and the moment my mom and I walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter than we had in years. But the story didn't end there. Healing takes time, and so does rebuilding a life from the pieces someone else tried to break. Now, years later, Mom is an emergency room nurse. She knows the signs when someone is hurt and afraid. She knows the right questions to ask. And I've learned something too. Bullies, no matter their age, only understand consequences. This is not just a story about pain. It's a story about courage, about taking back control when it feels like you have none. It's about the day I stopped being a scared little girl and became the kind of person who doesn't back down. Ever. And it all began with the decision I made when I was just 9 years old. Asterisk. The night it all began wasn't the loudest or the worst. In fact, that might be why it stuck with me, because the cruelty wasn't shouted. It was whispered. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, knees pulled to my chest, listening through the thin walls of our small house. My stepfather, Carl, spoke, in that cold, sharp tone that always made my stomach twist. Oh, my mom's voice trembled, low and hesitant, like she was afraid of her own words. "You're useless," he muttered, his words slicing through the silence like glass. "You can't even keep the house in order. What good are you?" I hated how still I stayed, like I could disappear if I was quiet enough. But my hands clenched around the blanket. I didn't cry anymore. In front of him, not where he could. See, when the sound of footsteps moved toward the kitchen, I slipped out of bed. My heart was pounding, but I wasn't afraid of getting caught. Not anymore. I had a secondhand tablet tucked inside my desk drawer, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. I opened the voice recorder app and pressed record. It wasn't much, just a faint capture of his words, muffled through the wall. Was something proof that the idea had come to me weeks earlier? After I overheard my teacher talking about evidence in a news story, people believed things when they saw or heard them. And Carl, he was always careful in front of others. The neighbors saw a smiling man who helped carry groceries. They didn't see the way his smile faded the moment our front door shut. That night was the first recording. Over the next months, I added more sharper words, crueler phrases. The way he slammed his hand on the table. The way my mom's voice cracked as she apologized for things that weren't her fault. I kept everything hidden in a password-protected folder labeled math homework. It felt dangerous. Sometimes, when I was in bed, I'd imagine what would happen if he found the recordings. Would he smash the tablet? Would he smash something else? But the fear didn't stop me. In a strange way, it fueled me. By spring, I had over a dozen files. Each one was a small piece of a bigger truth. But I still didn't know what to do with them. I was 9 years old, and while I understood the power of proof, I didn't understand the steps that came after. Then came the night that changed. Everything, a night I'll never forget. Asterisk, it was a Saturday night, early summer, the kind of evening when the air feels warm enough to carry voices down the street. The neighbors were having a barbecue. I could hear faint laughter drifting through the open window. Inside our house, it was the opposite, thick, heavy silence, the kind that presses on your chest. Carl had been drinking. I could tell by the way his footsteps dragged across the floor and the slight pause before each word. Like he was deciding whether to speak or explode. Mom had made roast chicken one of his favorites, but something about it too dry, too cold, too something set him off. "This is what I come home to," he said, voice low but cutting. "You had all day." She murmured something I couldn't hear. Then there was the sharp clatter of a plate hitting the sink. My fingers tightened around the tablet, already in my lap, already recording. "You think saying sorry fixes it," he continued. His voice grew louder, but not quite enough for the neighbors to notice. That was his specialty, rage disguised as irritation, cruelty, wrapped in calm. "You're pathetic. And so is that kid of yours?" My breath caught. He rarely mentioned me directly. I wanted to run into the kitchen and scream at him, tell him he was wrong. But I didn't. Not because I was afraid, though I was, but because I had learned something. Shouting back didn't help. Collecting evidence did. From my spot on the bedroom floor, I could hear the sound of a chair scraping against tile. Then, silence. Then Mom's voice, softer than I'd ever heard it. "Please, Carl, just eat. I'll make another one." He didn't answer. Footsteps retreated, the fridge door opened, then slammed shut. I ended the recording and saved it. Another file, another shard of truth. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat cross-legged in the dark, scrolling through my hidden folder. 17 files now. 17 moments that painted a different picture than the one Carl showed the world. But staring at them, I realized something that made my stomach twist. I couldn't keep this forever. Sooner or later, something had to happen. 2 weeks later, it did. It started small. A school flyer tucked in my backpack. Our district was launching a Speak Up program, encouraging students to report unsafe situations at home. There was even an anonymous email address. I read the flyer 3 times before stuffing it under my pillow. That night, as Carl argued with Mom in the living room, I opened my tablet and attached 3 of the clearest recordings to an email. I didn't write much, just my mom's. "Not safe. Please listen to these." I hit send before I could change my mind. The next day passed quietly, almost suspiciously so. Carl went to work early. Mom seemed tired, but didn't ask why I was staring at her so much. Then, just before dinner, there was a knock at the door. 2 people stood, their woman in a navy blazer and a man with a clipboard. They smiled politely, but their eyes scanned the house in a way that made my chest tighten. "Is this Mrs. Bennett?" the woman asked. "Yes," Mom replied, uncertain. "We're from Family Services. We just want to ask a few questions." Carl's car wasn't in the driveway. That helped. But as they stepped inside, I felt my pulse hammer in my ears. This was it, the moment the truth would stop, living only on my tablet, and start living out loud. The living room felt smaller with strangers in it. The woman from Family Services, whose name was Karen, sat across from Mom, speaking in a calm, steady voice. The man, her colleague, Daniel, took notes quietly, his pen scratching against the paper like a clock ticking down to something inevitable. I sat at the edge of the couch, pretending to scroll on my tablet but keeping my ears open. "Mrs. Bennett," Karen began, "we received a report about possible emotional and verbal abuse in your home. We'd like to understand your perspective." Mom's eyes darted toward me for the briefest second. I looked down, guilt pooling in my stomach. She had no idea I was the one who'd sent the recordings. "Abuse," she repeated, a weak smile, tugging at her lips. "No, it's just Carl can be strict sometimes. He works hard. He gets tired." Karen didn't flinch. "I understand. But sometimes stress can lead to patterns of behavior that are harmful, even if they're not physical. Would you say you feel safe in your own home?" Mom hesitated. That pause said more than any answer. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "If you'd like, we can speak with you privately. Or, if there's anything you'd like to share but can't right now, we can arrange a time when Carl isn't home." I held my breath, silently willing her to say yes, but she didn't. She forced another smile. one that didn't reach her eyes. "I appreciate your concern, but we're fine." "Really?" My chest tightened. This was exactly what I had feared, that even when the chance came, Mom would protect Carl instead of herself. Karen and Daniel exchanged a quick glance. Karen handed Mom a small card. "If you ever feel unsafe or need resources, you can call this number, day or night. No judgment, no questions you don't want to answer." Mom took it, nodding, but I could already tell she wouldn't use it. When they left, the air in the house shifted. That night, Carl came home earlier than usual. Smile was thin, his eyes sharp. "So," he said, setting his keys down slowly, "we had visitors today." My heart dropped into my stomach. Mom's voice was shaky. "It was nothing, Carl. Just a misunderstanding." He stared at her for a long moment, then at me. Funny thing about misunderstandings, they usually start with someone running their mouth. He didn't yell, he didn't throw anything that made it worse. His anger was quiet, simmering just under the surface. From that night on, he was different. Not outwardly cruel in front of Mom, but sharper with me when we were alone. Comments. That cut deeper. Little ways of reminding me I had no power here. I kept recording, though now it felt more dangerous. My folder grew from 17 files to 25. But instead of feeling safer, I felt like I was building a wall I'd eventually be trapped behind. One afternoon, about 3 weeks later, I got home from school to find my bedroom door slightly open. My stomach flipped. I knew I had closed it. That morning, my tablet was gone. I tore through the room under the bed, inside the closet. Nothing. Then I heard his voice from the hallway. Looking for this? Carl stood there, my tablet in his hand, screen glowing. I froze. "You're a sneaky little thing, aren't you?" He tapped the screen. "Hey? All these recordings, all these lies. They're not lies." I blurted before I could stop myself. My voice shook. He stepped closer, and for a second I thought he might hit me. But he didn't. Instead, he held the tablet high, then with one swift motion, slammed it against the wall. The crack of shattering glass made me flinch. "There," he said, "problem solved." He walked away, leaving the broken pieces scattered across the carpet. I stood there, staring at the wreckage, my throat burning. All the evidence I'd collected gone in an instant. But as I knelt to pick up the shards, I realized something. The evidence might be gone. But the truth wasn't. I still knew every word he'd said, every insult, every threat. And maybe, just maybe, I could find another way to make someone listen. Asterisk for the next few days. I moved through the house like a shadow. Spoke less, listened more. I avoided Carl when I could, but in a small house, avoidance was temporary at best. Every time his footsteps echoed down the hallway, my stomach tightened. My tablet was gone, my proof was gone, but I wasn't done. I started using my school laptop. The one he rarely touched because it was for homework. It wasn't as discreet, but it had one advantage: cloud storage. This time, if he destroyed the device, the files would survive. I began again recording in small bursts, capturing snippets of his voice when his tone turned sharp, when the venom slipped through his teeth. I didn't need hours of audio this time. I just needed enough to make someone believe me. It was risky. Carl had grown more suspicious since finding my tablet. Sometimes he'd open my bedroom door without knocking, his eyes scanning the room like he was taking inventory. One evening, Mom was in the kitchen making dinner, and Carl was in the living room watching the news. I was in my room, pretending to do homework, when I heard his voice suddenly rise. "Why are you making that? I told you I don't want pasta." Mom's reply was soft, almost apologetic. "It's what we have in the pantry, Carl. I'll make something else if you don't want something else later. I don't want this now." The sound of a pot clattering against the stove made me jump. I hit record. Carl's voice was a low snarl. "You're useless. You know that? Absolutely useless." There was silence, the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath. Then Mom's voice, barely audible. "Please don't." knew I had something that night after Carl fell asleep in his recliner. I transferred the file to the cloud and then emailed it to myself along with the others I'd managed to capture. The next morning, I left for school early, but I didn't go straight there. I walked 3 blocks in the opposite direction. It's this small brick building with a faded sign. Community Resource Center. Inside. The air smelled faintly of coffee and old carpet. A receptionist looked up from her desk. "Can I help you?" Hesitated, my heart pounding. "I need to talk to someone about things happening at home." She didn't ask for details. She just nodded and made a quick call. A few minutes later, a woman with warm brown eyes and a cardigan stepped out of an office. "Hi, I'm Denise. Why don't you come in?" Her office was small, with a desk covered in paperwork and 2 chairs by the window. I sat down, my fingers twisting together. "I don't know if this is the right place," I began. "But my stepdad, he's not." My throat tightened. "He says things to me, to my mom. Bad things." Denise's voice was gentle. "You're safe here. You can tell me anything." So I told her. Not everything. There weren't enough hours in the day, but enough. Enough for her to see the picture, and then I pulled out my laptop. I have proof. I showed her the recordings. She listened without interrupting, her eyes darkening with each passing minute. When I was done, she closed the laptop gently. "Did the right thing coming here? This is serious, and there are steps we can take. But I need you to understand this might get harder before it gets better." I nodded. I already knew that she promised to contact family services again, this time with the audio files attached. She also gave me a number I could call anytime, day or night, and a small laminated card that said, "You are not alone." When I left the center, the morning air felt colder than before, but it also felt sharper, clearer, like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't powerless after all. The tension in the house shifted after my visit to the resource center. It was subtle at first, a lingering stare from Carl when I passed him in the hallway, a sudden silence when I entered the room. But it was there, like a low hum under everything. He knew something. Maybe not exactly what, but enough to make him watch me more closely. One Thursday night, was in my room reading when I heard his heavy steps coming down the hall. My door creaked open without a knock. "What are you working on?" he asked. His tone was casual, but his eyes flicked straight to my laptop. "Math homework." I said, my pulse jumping. "Mind if I take a look?" Before I could answer, he stepped inside. My fingers froze over the keyboard. Every instinct screamed at me to slam it shut, but that would only confirm his suspicion. Instead, I clicked on a random spreadsheet I'd made for school and turned the screen toward him. He stared at it for a beat too long, then gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good to see you're using your time wisely." When he left, I let out the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. That weekend, things escalated. Mom had gone to the grocery store, leaving Carl and me alone. I tried to stay in my room, but he called me into the living room. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the couch. I sat. My palms damp. He leaned forward in his chair. "You've been different lately. Sneaky? I don't know what you mean." His smile was cold. "See? I think you do. And I think you've been talking to people about me. People who shouldn't be in our business." My throat went dry. "I haven't. Don't lie to me." His voice cracked like a whip. I flinched. He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "I'll tell you something, kid. In this house, there's loyalty." And when someone breaks that, he let the sentence hang, his gaze locking on mine. Things get unpleasant. When Mom came home, I slipped back into my room, my mind racing. I needed to get the rest of my files out of the house. That night, after Carl fell asleep, I backed everything up onto a hidden flash drive and tucked it inside the lining of my backpack. If he took my laptop, he wouldn't get the evidence. The next few days felt like walking on glass. Every conversation was a test, every look a threat. Mom noticed something was wrong but didn't press. She had learned, like me, to measure her words when Carl was around. Then, on Tuesday, it happened. I came home from school to find my bedroom door open and my laptop gone. Panic shot through me. I ran to the living room. Carl was sitting in his chair, my laptop on his lap. "You really should log out of your email," he said, scrolling with deliberate slowness. "You never know who might be curious." My heart slammed against my ribs. "That's my private stuff." He cut me off. "Private? In this house? No. There's no such thing as private here." I wanted to grab it from him, but I knew that would be the end of me. Finally, he closed the laptop and handed it back. "You keep your nose clean? We won't have any more misunderstandings." I took it, muttered, "Okay," and went to my room. What he didn't know was that I'd already wiped the most important files from the device 2 days ago. They were safe, file site, untouchable. Still, the encounter left me shaken. He suspected I had evidence. He might stop playing mind games and move to something worse. That night, lying in bed, I made a decision. I couldn't just collect proof anymore. I had to act soon before Carl decided to make good on his threats. Asterisk, the decision sat in my chest like a weight. Every hour I waited, Carl grew bolder, more confident that he had me cornered. I couldn't give him another chance to take control. On Wednesday afternoon, I stayed late after school under the pretense of a group project. In reality, I was at the public library using one of their computers. I plugged in my flash drive, hands trembling, and sent every file, every photo, document, and recorded conversation to the investigator at the resource center. I attached one sentence: "If something happens to me or my mom, you know who to look at." When the files were sent, I ejected the drive and slid it into my pocket. My heart pounded not just from fear, but from the knowledge that the moment I pressed send, the game had changed. On the walk home, the air felt sharper, heavier. Every sound, a car door slamming, a dog barking, made me flinch. By the time I reached the driveway, I'd rehearsed exactly what I'd say if Carl confronted me. But the house was strangely quiet. Mom was in the kitchen, her face pale, her hands clenched around a mug. "What happened?" I asked. Her eyes darted toward the hallway. "Carl's in the garage. He's angry. Just stay in your room." I nodded, but my mind was already racing. I couldn't wait any longer. Tonight was the night. I packed a small backpack with clothes, my phone charger, and the flash drive. Then I slid my sneakers under the bed, ready to grab them in seconds. Dinner was tense. Carl barely spoke, but his eyes kept landing on me. I felt like prey under a predator's gaze. When the plates were cleared, he announced he was going to the store. The moment the front door closed, I turned to Mom. "We have to go now." She froze. "What are you talking about?" "I sent everything to people who can help us. But Carl's not going to let this go. If we stay, something bad will happen." Her lips trembled. "Where would we go?" "There's a safe shelter." The resource center gave me the address. "But we can't take much, and we can't leave a note." She looked at me for a long moment, measuring my seriousness, maybe searching for doubt. Then she nodded. "'Kay." We moved fast, grabbing only essentials. I shoved them into the backpack while Mom stuffed a tote bag with documents and a few photos. We slipped out the back door, taking the alley instead of the street. The night air was cold, stinging my cheeks, but every step away from that house felt lighter. We were halfway down the block when I heard the roar of Carl's truck turning into the driveway. "Run," I whispered. We ducked behind a neighbor's hedge as he parked. The sound of his door slamming echoed through the night. I could almost feel his rage radiating through the air. Mom's hand squeezed mine when he disappeared inside. We kept moving, our feet barely touching the ground. It took 20 minutes to reach the bus stop. The shelter was across town, and every passing headlight felt like it might be his. But the bus arrived, and we climbed on without looking back. As we pulled away, I saw our street vanish into the distance. My chest loosened for the first time in months. I didn't know exactly what tomorrow would bring: police reports, questions, maybe even court. But for now, we were free, and freedom, no matter how fragile, was worth every risk. Asterisk. The shelter was quiet, almost too quiet after the chaos of the last few days. Mom and I were shown to a small room with 2 narrow beds and a single lamp. It wasn't much, but it was safe. For the first time in months, I could close my eyes, without listening for footsteps in the hall. The next morning, we met with a counselor who had already received the files I'd sent. She assured us they'd been forwarded to the police and that we wouldn't have to go back to Carl's house. By the end of the week, a detective came to take our statements. He was calm, methodical, but there was no mistaking the shift in his expression as he looked through the evidence. "You did the right thing," he said, "and you might have saved more than just yourselves." Carl was arrested 2 days later. I never saw him again, but I heard enough from the case updates to know he wasn't coming back. There were other victims, people who had been too afraid to speak. My heart ached for them, but it also burned with quiet pride. We had stopped. Mom struggled at first. There were moments when she questioned if we'd made a mistake, when she missed the life we'd left behind, even if it had been poisoned. But every time I reminded her, we didn't lose a home. We saved our lives. Months passed, and little by little, the weight lifted. I focused on school, on friends, on building something that was mine. Mom found work at a local cafe, where she started smiling again, real smiles, the kind I hadn't seen in years. One evening, as we sat on the shelter's back porch watching the sunset, Mom turned to me and said, "You were braver than I was." I shook my head. No, I just couldn't let him win. She took my hand, her grip warm and steady. "You didn't just stop him, you saved me." The sky darkened, but for the first time, it didn't feel threatening. It felt like a curtain closing on one chapter and opening on another. We didn't know exactly where we were headed, but we knew one thing for sure. We were finally walking toward the light. Asterisk if this story touched you. I hope you'll take a moment to think about the people in your life who might be silently struggling. Sometimes the ones who seem the strongest are the ones carrying the heaviest burdens. A simple message, a phone call, or even a kind word can be the lifeline they've been waiting for. What my mom and I went through wasn't easy to share. But by telling it here, I hope it reaches someone who needs the reminder that leaving is not weakness, it's courage. And that no matter how trapped you feel, there is always a way forward. If you believe in the power of stories to heal, inspire, and bring people together, please help us keep sharing them. Like this video so it can reach more hearts. Share it with someone who might see themselves in our journey. And, most importantly, subscribe to Real Moments so you won't miss the next story. Because you never know which one might be the voice of hope someone desperately needs to hear. Your support doesn't just help this. It helps keep these conversations alive. The ones that can spark change, open eyes, and maybe even save lives. And if you are someone facing fear or uncertainty right now, please remember this: you are not alone. There are people and resources ready to help. And the first step, no matter how small, is worth taking. Thank you for listening to our story, for being part of this community, and for believing in the strength of the human spirit. Together, we can keep walking toward the light one story at a time.